getting anything out of the deal, which is why parasites are sometimes described as predators that eat in units of less than one. But parasites aren't quite the same as predators who kill and eat other animals. For one, they're usually much, much smaller than their hosts, and they usually try to keep their hosts alive. They also interact with their hosts a lot more than a predator interacts with its prey, sometimes for years at a time. Parasites are super specialized and structurally adapted for their exploitative lifestyle. While a lot of parasites have lost traits, because they've adapted to rely on their host to fulfill some of their needs, there's so much more than that. Parasites are a super diverse group of animals, and there are lots of ways we can split them into categories. One way is by where they live. So whether they're endoparasites inside the body or ectoparasites outside the body, like we saw with our bear. We can also categorize parasites by how they find their host, though some animals fall into more than one category or change their strategy over their life cycle. Those ticks and lice that were on our black bear are directly transmitted parasites. They find their hosts on their own, like by wading in tall grass and hopping on as the bear walked by. And directly transmitted parasites usually have a lot of the features we see in non-parasitic animals, like being able to move around on their own. There are also trophically transmitted parasites, like roundworms, that spread by getting eaten. A lot of these parasites use being eaten by one animal, called an intermediate host, to travel to its primary host where it reproduces. Like the larvae could burrow into the muscles of a fish or rabbit and begin growing when they sense the proteins and acid in the gut of their primary host, the bear, after being eaten. And lots of bacteria and viruses, as well as parasitic worms called helminths, are vector-transmitted parasites. They get into their proper hosts with the help of another organism called a vector that transfers the disease-causing agent from one organism to another. A lot of the blood-feeding animals fall here too. Like the mosquitoes hovering around our bear could be vectors for the West Nile virus. Ticks can transfer the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, and so on. Which brings us to another way we can categorize parasites: how they get energy. All the mosquitoes, ticks, and leeches that nibble at their host without killing it outright are showcasing micropredation. Usually they don't do too much damage by themselves, but sometimes numbers or mismatched ecologies can make micropredators become capital P predators, like we saw with sea lamprey back in episode 4. Invertebrates, who you've probably noticed by now are way more hardcore than us chordates, might use parasitic castration. This is when a parasite wrecks its host's ability to reproduce so that the parasite can suck up all that energy that would have gone to making eggs or finding a mate. Animals normally use a lot of their resources to reproduce, so that's an even bigger free lunch buffet for the parasite. But I guess at least the host gets to go on living, which isn't always the case. Parasitoids just end the actual life of their host, which is a pretty bold move for a parasite. Most parasitoids are insects, like many wasps, but lay their eggs on host larvae. Sometimes the larvae develop inside the host, sometimes outside. Sometimes the host is immobilized once it's infected, and sometimes it keeps going along its business until the larvae kill it. Either way, the parasitoid sucks energy from its host until there's nothing left. And don't think parasites are safe from other parasites. There are parasitoids that attack the larvae of other parasites, which is called hyperparasitism. One example is the cabbage white butterfly, which is attacked by 2 species of parasitoid wasps. The larvae of those wasps are attacked by another wasp. So you get a moth infected with a parasite that's itself infected with another parasite. It's basically like a parasite turducken situation. Since parasites and their hosts share such a close relationship, we might wonder how evolutionarily related they are. Let's say we wanted to make a taxonomic sandwich where the host is one piece of bread and the parasite is the other, and the evolutionary time between them is the filling. Like take E. perplexa the parasite and E. perplexa the host. Their sandwich is just 2 pieces of bread. Incarcia perplexa are parasitoid wasps who are like self-parasites. E. perplexa usually parasitizes the eggs of citrus blackflies. But when there's no male wasps around, unmated females will lay unfertilized eggs inside larvae of their own species. True to form, the new baby E. perplexa cannibalizes its cousin to grow up. Since these wasps have a haplodiploid sex determination system, where sex depends on the number of chromosome sets an offspring has, unfertilized eggs always become males. So now there's males to solve that fertilization problem. Turns out you can't even trust your evolutionary relatives. These wasps are adelphoparasites, which target animals that are very closely related to themselves, often belonging to the same family or even genus. Talk about terrible in-laws. In general, though, hosts and their parasites are usually not closely related. For one, there are just so many parasites out there. It's a lifestyle that's evolved literally over 100 times, which is because there are so many niches or ecological places that they can take. Each species of animal is its own ecosystem, and each tissue or cell type a unique habitat. Parasitism is smart, evolutionarily speaking, because you freeload off someone else's hard work to get food, have babies, move around, or find a home. And with natural selection being as selective as it is, animals can use every little advantage they can get. Though freeloading might be kind of harsh. Parasites get a bad reputation, but they're really important parts of their ecosystems. For example, parasites are a fundamental part of the food web, and for some animals, parasites are even part of their regular diet, like how opossums love to eat ticks. But parasites depend on their hosts for survival, which sometimes put them on the wrong side of conservation efforts. Like the California condor mite went extinct in the late 1980s when the 22 remaining California condors were brought into captivity and deloused for a breeding program. In saving condors, we doomed the mites, an example of what's called conservation-induced extinction. With the benefit of hindsight, we've realized we lost a lot of information about not only the mites, but the condors as well. The mite biohackers probably knew some things about the condor immune system we don't, for example. And having parasites in a population isn't bad. It at least means that the hosts are also present. And since a lot of parasites use multiple hosts, they're a good indicator of how the whole ecosystem is doing. So scientists are starting to use parasite abundance to track the effects of pollution or other forms of environmental degradation and are pushing for more parasite conservation. And lastly, parasites are also really important in the context of evolution. They're an agent of natural selection since parasite-infected animals have a harder time passing down their genes. And studying how parasites interact with their hosts might give us some hints about how things happened millions of years ago, like how complex social relationships between animals may have evolved from animals picking parasites off each other's skin or fur. So studying parasites could change everything we know about animals. Parasites are mysterious, but next episode we'll dive deep into some of the most enduring zoological mysteries and how sometimes more information means more complicated questions. Thanks for watching this episode of Crash Course Zoology, which was produced by Complexly in partnership with PBS and Nature. It's shot on the Team Sandoval Pierce stage and made with the help of all of these nice people. If you'd like to help keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, you can join our community on Patreon.
If you have recently been treated for a heart attack, a condition caused by a blockage of blood flow to your heart muscle, this video will help you understand the condition and its treatment. Your heart is a muscular organ that pumps blood containing the oxygen and nutrients your body needs. The main pumping chamber of your heart is the left ventricle. When your left ventricle contracts, it sends oxygen-rich blood to your body through a large artery called the aorta. connected to your aorta are small arteries called coronary arteries. Blood flows from your aorta through the coronary arteries to supply your heart muscle with oxygen and nutrients. During your heart attack, blood flow through one of your coronary arteries may have been severely reduced or completely blocked. Your reduced blood flow may have been caused by a buildup of a fatty substance called plaque in your coronary arteries. If this plaque became disrupted, a blood clot might form and severely worsen the narrowing, or lead to a sudden, complete blockage, stopping blood flow down the artery. A blockage in your coronary arteries prevented the oxygen and nutrients in your blood from reaching the part of your heart supplied by the artery. As a result, heart muscle in that area started to die. Damage to part of your heart muscle is called a heart attack. It's also known as a myocardial infarction, or MI. Your heart doctor may have recommended a procedure to help open the blockage and improve blood flow to the damaged area. The procedure you had may have been a coronary angioplasty. During a coronary angioplasty, a balloon-tipped catheter inflates inside your blocked coronary artery to open it. The procedure may have involved placing a stent to help prop the artery open. This is usually a thin metal mesh that acts as a scaffold. Or you may have had a coronary artery bypass graft, or CABG. CABG is a surgical procedure in which the blocked areas of the coronary arteries are bypassed with veins or other arteries from the body. Before you left the hospital, your healthcare provider most likely prescribed several medications. Your medication may include the following: oral antiplatelet therapy helps prevent platelets from sticking together and forming new blood clots. You may have also received drugs called beta blockers that help lower your heart rate and blood pressure. Drugs such as angiotensin-converting enzyme, or ACE inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, or ARBs, and calcium channel blockers also work to lower your blood pressure if needed. And you may have been prescribed statins, along with a low-fat diet, to lower your cholesterol. These drugs work by reducing the amount of cholesterol made in your liver. It is important to stay on your medications as your physician prescribed, even if you are feeling better. Do not go off your medication unless the healthcare professional that prescribed them tells you to.
This one's been requested quite a few times, so today I'm going to look at the question, do we, and indeed all animals, have a predestined set number of heartbeats in our lifetime? I was surprised how many people believe this, but actually it's rooted in a bit of truth. The magic number is supposed to be 1 billion heartbeats in a lifetime. So let's do a quick bit of mental arithmetic. A human might have a heart rate of about 60, which is 86,000 beats per day, which is 32 million beats per year. So that means a typical human should live for 32 years and then die. Wait a second. Ah, fuck. I'd like to go to the gym, you know, but we've only got a set number of heartbeats, so don't want to use them up. You get me?
That's not how the Force works.
The idea that we have a set number of heartbeats can first be traced back to ancient Buddhist and Hindu philosophy that suggested that all living things have a predetermined time on Earth. Now clearly we know that isn't true. There are studies dating back decades which show that there are certain things you can do to make your life longer. For example, most people alive today are going to die of cardiovascular disease or cancer, and both of these things have modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. Modifiable risk factors are things like exercising regularly, maintaining a healthy weight, not smoking, keeping an eye on your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your blood sugar. All of these things will make you live longer. Non-modifiable risk factors are things like age and family history, so don't get old and choose your parents carefully. So where does this figure of 1 billion come from? Well, if you rewind a few thousand years to a time before humans started improving their living conditions and we had a life expectancy of around 30, you can then compare us to animals, having taken those modifiable risk factors out of the equation. After all, prehistoric man nor animals are well known for their addiction to McDonald's, and then you'll find that rule is remarkably accurate. I was giving a talk at the Science Museum here in London earlier this year, and I took along 2 hearts. A mouse heart donated kindly by one of my research colleagues, and a cow heart from the butcher. Now, a mouse and a cow are vastly different in size. The cow heart was 2,000 times heavier than the mouse heart, but whereas a mouse might live for 2 years, a cow could live for 22 years. Well, not that cow. However, because a mouse's heart rate is 800 beats a minute and a cow's is more like 70 beats a minute, in their entire lifetime they actually have fairly comparable number of heartbeats. If you scale this up further to something like a whale, then you'll find that the rule still holds true. Indeed, many people have looked into this and generated some lovely curves showing that as heart rate decreases, lifespan increases. But why is this? Well, the first idea, which seems intuitive, is that heart rate is a reflection of metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate is how much energy you use per unit of time per unit of mass. For example, joules per hour per kilogram, or a permutation thereof. So we need to figure out why different animals have different metabolic rates. Well, you've eaten some hot pie, right? So you already know the answer. Oh, you want me to explain it? As we all know, if you cut a pie into small pieces, they cool down much faster than one big pie. Small things lose heat far more rapidly than big things as they have more surface area per volume. So mice need to generate way more heat, otherwise they would die of cold. You can see this from the amount of food each animal eats. A mouse consumes about 1/3 of its body weight per day, whereas a cow only 2%. If we ate the same proportion as a mouse, it would be the equivalent of eating about 30 pies a day.
This man ate till he burst.
Therefore, although mousy cells and cow cells are fairly similar, the mouse mitochondria in each cell is producing more heat. This is the rate of living theory that suggests that metabolic rate is inversely proportional to lifespan. It was first proposed in 1908, and although it's an elegant application of thermodynamics to living things, it's essentially been debunked because, at the end of the day, this isn't physics. It's actually complicated. Yes, in biology, things are rarely as simple as a rule of thumb can predict, and ultimately, there's no clear relationship between basal metabolic rate and life expectancy. For example, there are other reasons that small animals might have shorter lives. They're more vulnerable to predators, so evolution might have resulted in a situation where they reach sexual maturity much more quickly before they're eaten. Okay, so we've explained why different animals have different metabolic rates, but we still haven't found a link between heart rate and life expectancy. The simple but complicated answer is probably aging. Here's a pro tip. I start pretty much any talk at a conference or university with, well, the thing is with insert literally any subject, is that we don't really understand it. And then A, people think you're way more knowledgeable than you actually are because you can afford to be so humble, and B, they're more forgiving when your talk is an incoherent, rambling mess because you did your slides at 3 a.m. the night before. Hypothetically, you understand. Well, the thing with aging is that nobody really understands it. One theory is that mitochondria are intrinsic to the way cells age and eventually die, and they might act as regulators of the pathways that control aging. The mitochondrial free radical theory suggests that oxygen-free radicals are generated at the level of the respiratory electron transport chain, the process by which your mitochondria make ATP, the energy that powers everything you do. And reactive oxygen species cause oxidative damage. Therefore, the fact that mouse mitochondria are more active and producing more energy might translate into the mouse literally aging faster than the cow. We see mitochondrial DNA mutations in older mammals. A deficiency in the electron transport chain in certain cell types like heart cells, skeletal muscle, or neurons is also seen in elderly humans. Now, let's not commit the cardinal sin of inferring causality when what we're seeing is correlation, but nevertheless it's interesting stuff. However, it's one of about 12 theories of aging. Perhaps all of them play a role. An interesting tangent here is the effect of cold. Some of the longest living organisms on Earth are found in icy waters, from Greenland sharks, which may be 400 years old, to 11,000-year-old sponges. An extreme example of cold stopping the clock is the wood frog that you've met on this channel before, which freezes solid for several months. But a lot of this life is poikilothermic, i.e. its body temperature varies according to the environment around it, but we're homeothermic, or warm-blooded, so does any of this apply to us? We use hypothermia in medicine all the time. Donated organs are transported on ice to prevent damage. Its use in surgery has gone in and out of fashion over the years, like cardiac surgery, where occasionally a patient is cooled profoundly to 18 degrees Celsius to effectively suspend a lot of metabolic processes, rendering them in a state that is virtually indistinguishable from death. Mice that had their core body temperature reduced just 0.3 degrees Celsius lived longer, to the tune of 12% for males and 20% for females. If you've even got a passing interest in science, you'll have met this handsome critter before, the naked mole rat. Along with their other magical superpowers, naked mole rats live for 30 years, in contrast to similarly sized rodent cousins who live for about 2 or 3 years. Their core body temperature is also 3 to 5 degrees Celsius lower. Hypothermia can alter a plethora of cellular pathways, resulting in less inflammation, fewer cells dying, and an increase in anti-apoptotic or trophic factors. Cold shock proteins are proteins that are upregulated in bacteria in response to cold and have been known about for a long time. There are similar families of proteins that are increased in human cells in response to cold, but at present we don't really know what that means. They appear to have a role in preventing cell death, and that has led to them being the foundation for things like ice baths after training or the expensive and fashionable cryotherapy. As is often my message on this channel, don't believe the hype. Heart rate, we do know, is correlated to body temperature. Hypothermic patients have slower heart rates, but that's normally talked about in pathological hypothermia, when somebody's been exposed to the elements all night or something like that. But temperature, normal temperature, is a range. It's typically described as something like 36.1 to 37.2 or 3 degrees Celsius. So it's possible that people who have a slower heart rate might be ever so slightly colder, but still within that normal range. So how does this affect you? Well, recently I was asked to help with an AI project for the British Medical Journal, cataloguing their cardiology journal, which is called Heart. So I was looking at old papers, and I came across this Danish study which looked at 3,000 men followed up over 16 years, which is quite a long time for a medical study. And what it found is that heart rate is an independent predictor of life expectancy, irrespective of your level of fitness as measured on a test, the amount of exercise you do as part of your daily routine, or your cardiovascular risk factors. And it's not because there's something magical about heart rate, it's because a low heart rate is reflective of a good state of physical fitness. There are two natural ways you can reduce your heart rate. The first is not advisable. Short of doping with thyroid medication, please don't do that. Or sleeping in the freezer, please don't. Well, I guess if it was quite comfy, no, please don't sleep in the freezer. There's really no way you can reduce your natural core body temperature, but we can exercise to bring our heart rate down. So get out there, stay active, and see how low you can go. Tell us in the comments below your lowest resting heart rate, and the winner gets a free pacemaker. Now I'm off to the work Christmas party, where I propose demonstrating to my work colleagues the importance of exercise by destroying them on the dance floor.
KC is a 79-year-old man presenting to the emergency room with chest pain radiating to his left jaw. His wife Jane tells the admitting nurse that earlier that morning he had become short of breath. He felt nauseous and lightheaded before collapsing to the floor. You see, KC was observing a yearly time change enacted by US law, daylight saving time, where everyone in the country would set their clock forward 1 hour at 2 a.m. the second Sunday in March. Officially, the reason to do this is to save energy and boost the economy by increasing the number of daylight hours during spring and summer seasons, but KC's case is part of a building body of evidence. This time change can negatively affect human health. Immediately after setting his clock an hour forward, Casey felt disoriented. He had done this before for the last 45 years of his life, so there's nothing different on this Sunday in March. He did have trouble sleeping that weekend because of the time change, although he didn't think too much of it. But the next day on Monday morning, just before breakfast, Casey suddenly felt his jaw become stiff. His chest tightened instantly. He gripped the armrest of his chair because every breath he tried to take was a struggle. He didn't want to tell his son downstairs because he thought that it would frighten the grandkids. He didn't want to tell his wife because he thought she'd overreact. He didn't think this was a big deal. At lunchtime, Casey tried to lay down because he thought he could sleep this off. But 20 minutes later, he vomited 3 times with no relief. Casey couldn't take it anymore. He could barely breathe anymore. His wife found him collapsed on the floor as she called for 911, and he's brought to the emergency room where we are now. Given this history of present illness, there's a few clues as to what's happening. Chest pain with shortness of breath could be a problem of the lungs, but it could also be a problem of the heart. Casey had a prior history of diabetes and asthma, which could be the main problem here, but there's definitely more. The medical team immediately draws some of Casey's blood. They hook him up to an ECG. Proteins and enzymes from his heart muscle were found floating around in his blood, and the ECG confirmed the medical team's suspicions. Casey is having an ST elevation, myocardial infarction. Myo meaning muscle. Cardia from ancient Greek referring to the heart. Infarction from Latin farcire, meaning to stuff into, and more modernly meaning a blockage of blood flow causing cell death. Death of heart muscle due to a blockage of blood flow, and ST elevation referring to the ECG reading that he has a specific change in the electricity of his heart, meaning that he's having a heart attack, which brings us to the next clue. Casey told the medical team that he was a type 2 diabetic. This means that his body's cells are resistant to insulin. This is a hormone that your body releases after you eat. Insulin enables the shift of those nutrients you just ate into the cells, like sugar. When the body doesn't respond to insulin anymore, blood sugars stay high because they're not going into the cells. But also, the body starts putting out wrong signals because it thinks that insulin isn't being released, so it asks for more. The body thinks that it's starving and starts metabolizing fat stores into the bloodstream. As these fats float around, some of them get transported into the liver to make cholesterol. All of this causing hyperlipidemia. Hyper meaning high. Lipid referring to fats, and emia meaning presence in blood. High fat presence in blood. This means these blood fats will start pooling in the vessels that supply blood to the heart, called the coronary arteries. The heart is a large muscle. Big muscles are very oxygen hungry, so they need a lot of it to function. Blocking the coronary arteries will starve the heart of oxygen and cause parts of it to die. And in KC, parts of his heart were starting to die, which brings us back to the name ST elevation, myocardial infarction. KC was at an increased risk of heart attack to begin with. At 79 years old, his heart has degraded over time because of normal wear and tear. No one at 80 has the same heart that they did when they were 20. But Casey's heart also degraded more because his diabetes means that his body's metabolism can't get his blood sugars right, his body can't get his blood fats right, and his body can't signal right with the correct hormones. Fats start to pool into his arteries. This causes the smooth muscle lining inside those arteries to die. But it's not done here. White blood cells rush into the site because they detect damage. They start to engulf the dead cells of the artery wall, but they also engulf the fats. And as more fats keep accumulating, these white blood cells start to die too. Smooth muscle cells start to make collagen and proteins to cover up this dead necrotic core. This fibrous cap seals the area and the plaque formation is complete. But while this plaque can cause a heart attack by itself, it isn't always an ST elevation heart attack. ST elevation means a full blockage, meaning that whatever is there isn't just fat. But what else could it be? It would have to be something that's already in the blood. It could be more fat, but probably not likely since this is so sudden. It's not sugar because that's probably not going to clump up in solution. But speaking of clumping up, how about a blood clot? This additional blockage can happen suddenly. It can block the whole thing. It can cause immediate changes in an ECG reading that changes over minutes as heart muscle keeps dying from the lack of oxygen. Without fresh blood flowing in, waste products from cells begin to accumulate. The heart tries to compensate, but as each minute passes by, parts of Casey's heart keep dying. But why would this blood clot form? Clots usually form when you get a cut, like on your skin. So did he get a cut inside of his coronary artery? How would that even happen? Well, the plaque is made of cholesterols and white blood cells that died when they engulfed too much fat. The plaque is inflamed. Inflammation is what happens like when you get a cut. Diabetes puts someone in a pro-inflammatory state. The immune system expands the blood vessels so more fluid can flow in and more immune cells can enter the area. The thing is, the chemicals released by the immune cells during inflammation in and around the plaque break down that fibrous cap. The plaque ruptures. Other blood cells think that the vessel wall is injured like a cut and they start clumping there. This completely blocks the artery very quickly, causing Casey's sudden heart attack. So that's the how of Casey's heart attack. But why did it happen? And what does daylight saving time have to do with it? Well, it actually might have a lot to do with it. This brings us to a concept called the circadian rhythm. This refers to our body's natural clock. Science suggests that the human circadian rhythms are based around sunlight. So this directly ties our internal clocks with sleep. This is why it's harder to take a nap in the morning if you've been sleeping well the past few nights. It's why many people feel gross after pulling all-nighters and waking up at nighttime when it's dark outside. And the sunlight hypothesis is why we think computer screens which mimic daylight keeps us up at night and disrupts sleep. There are differences between people in terms of their biological clock. Some are morning people, some are night owls, but the overwhelming majority of people show differences in the activity inside of their bodies at different times of the day. In human experiments, we found that sleep deprivation increases inflammation. The average sleep duration in Western societies has decreased from 9 hours to 7.5 over the last 100 years, and it looks like it's still decreasing. In that same experiment, scientists found that depriving someone of sleep impairs their insulin sensitivity and glucose tolerance. More evidence from decades worth of studies show that night shift workers, that's people who work overnights, do have a higher chance of developing diabetes and cardiovascular disease over years if they keep working those tough shifts due to increased inflammation, decreased insulin sensitivity, and impaired glucose tolerance. All three of these were already a problem in KC because he had diabetes, but there's more. Daylight saving time has been shown to disrupt human circadian seasonal adjustment. On the second Sunday in March, most of the United States sets their clock forward 1 hour. This date sits about a week and a half from the Northern Hemisphere spring equinox. Right around this time, sunrise and sunset widen dramatically, which means our bodies are already adapting to seasonal change. But when an arbitrary 1 hour shift happens, it forces yet an additional change on our bodies. This extra disruption in circadian rhythm significantly changes which genes are expressed in our body. It inflicts signal changes disrupting sleep, increasing inflammation, decreasing insulin sensitivity, causing a cascade of metabolic derangements. Some of the data shows there is an increased incidence of heart attack in the days following the 1 hour forward adjustment, in line with the scientific reason for why it happens. Young people can tolerate these changes, but elderly with pre-existing conditions likely cannot handle this, which brings us back to KC. As each minute passes, his chances of dying from a heart attack increase. He's immediately sent into the hospital's cath lab. This is a place where doctors can use imaging equipment to see arteries and chambers of his heart. They send a small wire through a blood vessel in his wrist to reach his heart. They find the blood vessel that's completely blocked. A balloon is placed on the wire, and through the blockage, it's inflated, popping the blood vessel open. A mesh called a stent is placed in to help keep that artery open. The stent also releases medicine that helps prevent scar tissue from forming at that site. This process is called percutaneous coronary intervention, PCI, and it's part of something called reperfusion therapy, meaning that it helps get blood flowing back into the heart again. So, cases like Casey's bring up a lot of different issues. Data shows an increase in heart attacks in the days right after the 1 hour forward. A letter to the editor in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2008 wrote that in Sweden, from 1987 to 2006, the incidence of all heart attacks increased in spring daylight saving time, mainly in the first 3 days after the time change and continuing for the week. Interestingly enough, during the autumn time change, where we go backwards 1 hour to normal time, incidence of heart attack decreased in the days afterwards. So okay, that's Sweden. Their daylight saving time is later in March compared to the United States. They're in a different part of the world, on a different latitude. What about American data? Well, the published data is a little bit more limited. It's mostly focused on Michigan, and they do show that there is an increase in heart attacks in the immediate days following daylight savings time. So, the evidence that it happens is there. The scientific rationale that it happens is there. Going an hour forward just before the spring disturbs sleep quantity and sleep quality in humans. Altering the circadian rhythm leads to an increased activity of the sympathetic nervous system, which directly affects the heart. Metabolic derangements that mimic type 2 diabetes happen during this change, along with increased inflammation. For people at risk of developing heart attacks in the first place, all of these disruptions can be the straw that breaks that camel's back and be that final blockage in the coronary artery, causing a heart attack. Casey was allowed to rest after his PCI. Days later, he was discharged. Having an ST elevation myocardial infarction puts his 30-day risk of dying between 2 to 3%. His chances of presenting to the emergency room again in the next 30 days is maximum 25%. But not missing his doses of his medicine and trying to control his diabetes helped him be in that 97% that don't die after a successfully treated heart attack. And it helped him be in that 75% of patients who aren't rehospitalized. So the point of this video is to tell you how a specific type of heart attack happens. If you're young and healthy, you probably don't have a coronary plaque. It's not just getting enough sleep, it's getting the right kind of sleep. Slow wave sleep happens hours after sunset, between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. You might miss out on this part if you go to sleep late, and you might miss out on the growth hormone that's usually released during this time as dictated by the circadian clock. Over years, if you don't sleep well, you don't eat well, and you don't exercise, and you smoke, these are going to add up. Human hearts deteriorate over time no matter what, but it's in your control as to how quick that decline happens based on your habits and behaviors for the most part. No matter what, that 1 hour forward is throwing off hundreds of millions of people with what looks like a minimal benefit, with only harm for patients like KC. Every year, there's a lot more people that are entering in that 65 and up demographic because of the baby boomer generation. These are the ones who are going to get hit the hardest by this. I would prefer that we stay on standard time all year from a health standpoint, with care from the medical team, diligence in keeping up with his medicines, and staying on top of his diabetes control. KC was able to make a recovery. And thanks so much to my good friend, cardiologist and YouTuber, Dr. Rohin Francis, for reviewing this video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, and be well. A woman drank a 1-liter soy sauce colon cleanse in 2 hours. This is what happened to her brain. CG is a 39-year-old woman presenting to the emergency room with a rapidly deteriorating mental status. Her husband, Julio, is in a panic because his wife's heart stopped beating in the ambulance. Earlier that day, CG was performing a soy sauce colon cleanse. She was in poor health. She lost 25 pounds over the last 3 weeks. She was iron and vitamin deficient. Her husband states that she had started eating only white bread and canned fish about 6 months ago. And most recently, she was discharged from a psychiatric hospital for what they thought was paranoid schizophrenia, but it wouldn't respond to medicines. Believing that the government had poisoned her, she read somewhere on the internet about a soy sauce colon cleanse, where anyone who could drink 1 liter of soy sauce within 2 hours would be able to evacuate their entire body of toxins. This malicious internet information was exploiting gullible people for gags at the expense of those people's lives, and unfortunately, CG was convinced she was going to have the cleanest colon possible. Soy sauce is a brew of wheat, soy, and 20% of it is made from salt. The internet was crystal clear. Wherever salt is, the toxic water will flow towards it. So a liter of soy sauce in her colon will 100% draw out all the toxins and expel them from her body. Immediately after finishing the whole liter of soy sauce, CG could feel her heart beating faster. She felt pins and needles in her hands and legs. She resisted all urge to drink any water. Over the next 30 minutes, while driving home, CG stops on the side of the road and begins to cry. Her stomach is cramping hard. There's nothing to cry about, she thought, because the toxins were clearly leaving her body. At home now, her vision begins to warp. She's dizzy and confused as she begins to stumble around. Her husband, oblivious as to what's been happening, is unable to get any coherent words out of her. He lies her down in bed, where she mumbles unintelligibly, while he steps off briefly to use the restroom. A minute later, a loud crashing sound and chaos ensues in the other room. Julio runs to the kitchen where he finds CG unconscious on the floor as he calls for 911. Inside the ambulance, her heart begins to flutter and she goes into cardiac arrest. Paramedics scramble to resuscitate her with CPR as she's brought to the emergency room where we are now. Given this history of present illness, there's several clues as to what's happening. Most immediately, CG is suffering from acute hypernatremia. Hyper meaning high. Natri referring to sodium, or more formally natrium, as indicated by its symbol on the periodic table of elements, and emia meaning presence in blood. High sodium presence in blood. Acute, meaning that there were no underlying pathophysiologic conditions that are leading to this problem except for the 1 liter of soy sauce that's in her body at the moment. A 15 milliliter serving of soy sauce has 2.5 grams of salt. The recommended daily intake is 5.8 grams of salt. A lethal dose is 40 grams of salt. A gallon of chili juice has 120 grams of salt, and the 1 liter of soy sauce that CG drank in 2 hours has 200 grams of salt, 5 times the lethal dose. Half of table salt is made from sodium, giving way to the name of her condition, hypernatremia, high sodium presence in blood. The troll claim on the internet embodies the golden rule of disinformation. It's partially correct at first, and establishing that initial credibility dramatically increases the chances of someone believing the entire thing. And unfortunately for CG, she believed the entire thing. The correct part is that wherever sodium is, water will flow towards it. In this small science experiment, I dissolve salt in this water and place it into a tube. I submerge the tube in a pool of water that has no salt dissolved in it, and you'll see that water flows into the tube. That water flows towards the sodium. This phenomenon is possible in part because of a concept called tonicity. Tonic from ancient Greek tonos, meaning to stretch, but in this context referring to tension, a tension of water due to the presence of sodium. Nature tends towards a relaxed state, so a relaxation of this tension occurs when the concentration of sodium decreases, meaning hypotonic water will always flow towards hypertonic water. Wherever sodium is, water will flow towards it. But let's go to all the other parts, which are all wrong. CG was told that the soy sauce would stay in her colon. Toxin-filled water would then flow in and then she'd be cleansed, but that's not how it happens. To get to the colon, or the large intestines, food must pass first through the stomach and then through the small intestines. Her stomach was starting to cramp because she had a massive amount of sodium inside the lumen, or the hole of the stomach, and water from the muscle lining was getting violently sucked out because, again, wherever sodium is, water will flow towards it. After the stomach, the soy sauce continues into the small intestines, where it's absorbed into the bloodstream, meaning that the 200 grams of salt began to release into her blood. As salty blood flows throughout CG's body, it begins to suck water out of every single organ. Her kidneys are dehydrating and failing, but that's probably not going to kill her immediately. Her heart is dehydrating and failing because her plasma is expanding. That can kill you immediately, and her heart did go into cardiac arrest while in the ambulance, although that arrest largely in this case can be reversible as CPR can resuscitate her. But what is irreversible is the damage caused on brain shrinkage. As the blood vessels in her brain begin to crush up against each other, she'll begin to stroke. Blood no longer flows through her brain tissue as it begins to starve of oxygen and die, and means permanent brain damage in CG's case. Salty people have shrinking brains as the water gets sucked out of the contents of the skull and then are put into the blood. 200 grams of salt contains about 80,000 milligrams of sodium. Given that the average sodium content of one 8-gram slice of cooked bacon is 137 milligrams of sodium, then to get to about 80,000 milligrams, you would need to eat about 4.5 kilograms, or about 10 pounds of cooked bacon to match the amount of sodium that CG consumed. As her mental status continues to deteriorate, she's still semi-conscious. It may not yet be too late. She may not yet have stroked. Is there a way we could somehow remove that salt from her blood? Maybe. This brings us back to tonicity. The water in your body is mostly inside of your cells and is made of 0.9% salt, something that we call isotonic. Soy sauce is 20% salt. If water outside of CG's cells has high sodium and water flows towards where there's sodium, then it means that the solution should be to dilute her blood with less salty water. She's infused with 5 liters of water with 5% dextrose, known as glucose or sugar. The sugar will be absorbed by her cells, turning that solution into free water, which will then lower the concentration of sodium. She's also given water with 0.45% salt to dilute what's already in the blood. Over the next 72 hours, CG begins to stabilize. She opens her eyes to say hello to her husband, but drifts in and out of consciousness. The sodium in her blood is no longer high and everything seems to be okay. But it's not. It's 4 days later. CG opens her eyes. The nurse instructs her to move her arms, but no response. She tries to speak, but words can't come out of her mouth. Neurology consult reveals a marked dysarthria. Dys meaning wrong, and arthria from ancient Greek arthron meaning articulation. Her ability to articulate words in speech is absent. This was combined with dysphagia, an inability to swallow, and a flaccid quadriplegia. Quadri, from Latin quator, denoting the quantity of 4, referring to 2 arms and 2 legs, and plegia, from ancient Greek plesin, meaning disabled. Flaccid, meaning that she's floppy with no muscle tone. None of these are a sign of a stroke. Despite correcting the hypernatremia, it still appears that her brain has been damaged. MRI reveals CG has developed central pontine myelinolysis. Lysis, meaning breaking down of myelin, the conductive sheath covering nerve cells, and central pontine, referring to the central pons where the brain connects to the brainstem to deliver nerve impulses throughout the body. This means that something was wrong during the correction of her blood sodium levels. When the brain shrinks in acute hypernatremia, it tries to compensate for that water loss. We know that this happens in other mammals. If sodium draws water out of the brain, then the brain can fight this and maintain its volume by pumping sodium into its cells. Incidentally, it also draws in other chemicals to help prevent further water loss in an attempt to adapt to its environment. If less salty, hypotonic water is used to suddenly dilute the blood to prevent organs from shrinking, but the brain is already compensated by pumping extra salt into its cells, then it means that diluted water in the blood will actually swell into the brain, causing it to push up against the skull, causing something called cerebral edema. But her brain isn't swollen. On the flip side, if the less salty hypotonic water is used to slowly dilute hypernatremia, but the brain is already compensated by pumping in other chemicals into its cells, those chemicals don't easily clear the brain. This triggers changes inside the brain cells that lead to cell death cascading into myelinolysis, meaning that CG's brain still functions, but she's unable to send nerve impulses to the rest of her body, resulting in dysarthria, dysphagia, and flaccid quadriplegia. Meaning that either way, if you try to correct hypernatremia when it's too late, it will always end in poor neurologic outcomes, and for CG, it looks like it was corrected too late. None of this answers why she drank 1 liter of soy sauce colon cleanse in 2 hours. Was it disinformation? Maybe. Was it that she was gullible? Maybe. But almost no normal functioning human could drink nearly half a pound of salt without vomiting, meaning that CG had some quality to her that could separate her mind from the visceral reaction to drinking soy sauce, which brings us to her last problem. Medical records indicate that she unintentionally lost 25 pounds in 3 weeks, and that she was vitamin and iron deficient. That she was just discharged from the psychiatric hospital for paranoid schizophrenia, refractory to medication. Anytime someone loses a lot of weight unintentionally in the medical world, one of the first things that we think of is cancer. She didn't have any evidence of tumors, so that was ruled out. If she was also vitamin and iron deficient, then maybe she wasn't absorbing her food. And if you combine that with delusional symptoms that are refractory to medicines, then maybe she wasn't able to absorb those medicines either. meaning that she might have had a gastrointestinal problem. And given the fact that she started eating only canned fish and white bread that coincided with the onset of her delusions, and white bread is rich in the protein gluten, then she may have had celiac disease, a disease centered around a gluten allergy that causes intestinal inflammation, preventing the absorption of nutrients and manifesting extraintestinally as psychosis and delusional disorder. Looking at her cells from her intestines under a microscope revealed marked villus blunting and atrophy. Increased presence of white blood cells in the surface were found indicating inflammation and giving strong evidence of celiac disease. This means that she developed gluten sensitivity sometime in her midlife, became delusional and was misdiagnosed, didn't get the care that she needed in the psychiatric hospital, and was led to internet disinformation, leading her to drink a liter of soy sauce as a supposed colon cleanse, demyelinating parts of her brain and causing her to become quadriplegic. Clinically relevant gluten sensitivity doesn't happen to everyone. Celiac disease can develop at any age, and some people are genetically predisposed to it. This isn't to incite dietary fears in anyone. Celiac disease is a diagnosis that involves serologic testing, endoscopy, and biopsy. It's not a diagnosis after reading an online food blog. And unfortunately for CG, she was sold on a sham claim of a soy sauce colon cleanse. We can actually take soy sauce out of that phrase and just apply the word sham to colon cleanse. A normal functioning human has kidneys and a liver. The liver breaks down chemicals by metabolizing them, meaning that it makes them more water soluble so that they dissolve in the water and then get filtered by the kidneys and then are urinated out. In the emergency room, you often see people who are brought in because of false detox claims. You see people perforate their rectum from an enema that they thought was going to clear them of toxins. Or they drink some weird cabbage juice brew with copious amounts of salt that was supposed to cure them from some fake claim that ends up leading to hypernatremia, causing cerebral hemorrhage, stroke, and permanent brain damage. With proper treatment and follow-up, supportive care from the medical team, her loving husband, and adherence to a gluten-free diet which was appropriate for her medical diagnosis, CG sustained a recovery. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself and be well. A mom drank 3 gallons of water in 2 hours. This is what happened to her brain. KC is a 28-year-old woman presenting to the emergency room unconscious. Her husband Josh tells the admitting nurse at admission that she had suffered at least 2 seizures in the past 30 minutes. You see, KC had been participating in a radio show competition, Hold Your Wee for a Wee, where contestants would drink up to 3 gallons of water in 2 hours, and the last person to urinate or vomit would be the winner of a shiny Nintendo Wii. Clearly, this was for gags on behalf of the radio station and at the expense of its contestants, but KC was determined she was going to win that Nintendo and be able to play it with her kids. Immediately after finishing all 3 gallons of distilled water, KC complained of severe nausea, and in order to hold back the urge to vomit, she was found to clench the armrests of her chair. Within 20 minutes, KC was easily crowned victorious in the challenge, and her husband began to drive her home. About an hour after finishing all that water and in the car, she begins to cry. She's suffering a massive headache and tells her husband, "I'm coming out of my skull." She feels pressure push against her eyes and reports that the vision in her left eye is going dark. Her husband drives quickly so they can get home and she can take a nap because they both believe she can sleep it off. Interestingly enough, after drinking all that water, she has no urge to urinate or vomit. At home now, KC goes to her bed to lay down while her husband begins to prepare dinner. Dinner's ready. It's only been 30 minutes, and the husband watches some TV and lets his wife sleep. It's here, in bed, that KC silently suffers her first seizure. Unknowingly, Josh watches TV for another hour, trying to be considerate to his wife, who he believes is sleeping, but is actually unconscious and suffering seizures every 20 minutes. As he finally feels it's time to call her for dinner an hour later, he goes to her room to see her and finally sees her suffer yet one more seizure. 911 is called. Inside the ambulance, Casey's sixth seizure is seen by the paramedics as she arrives to the emergency room where we are now. Given the patient's immediate past medical history, there's several clues as to what's happening. Any doctor will be able to easily identify that Casey is suffering from acute hyponatremia. Hypo meaning low, natri meaning pertaining to sodium, or more formally natrium, as is shown by its symbol on the periodic table of elements, and emia meaning presence in blood, low sodium presence in blood. Acute, meaning that there are no underlying pathophysiologic conditions that are leading to this problem aside from the 3 gallons of water that are inside her body at the moment, which leads to the first clue. Josh tells the admitting nurse that Casey had not vomited or urinated since the contest ended, which means that there hasn't been a net flow out of her body. The 3 gallons of water are hanging around somewhere inside of her. That water is important to note because Casey is a woman. The female body is, on average, made of about 50% water compared to male bodies, which are typically 60% water. Given that Casey is 28 years old, she's premenopausal, meaning that she has more estrogen in her body than a 60-year-old postmenopausal woman. Estrogen is a sex hormone that increases the proliferation of fat tissue. Fat, which is made up of oils, doesn't mix well with water, so as women's bodies are made of more fat, they hold on to less water compared to men, who produce more sex hormone called testosterone, which increases the production of muscle tissue, a tissue that does hold on to water. So if the female body is typically made of less water and contains more fat, which doesn't mix with water at all, then where are those 3 gallons of water inside Casey's body? Well, there's a bit of basic chemistry to be known here. The fluid in your body is a soup of several chemicals. In this case, the most important being sodium, which is 1/2 of this table salt. The interesting thing about sodium is that it creates something called an osmotic gradient, which means that wherever sodium is, water will flow towards it. In this small science experiment, I dissolve salt in this water and place it into a tube. I submerge the tube in a pool of water that has no salt dissolved in it. You'll see that water flows into the tube. That water flows towards the sodium. So let's go back to the name of Casey's condition, hyponatremia, low sodium presence in blood. If she hasn't urinated or vomited since she drank all 3 gallons of water, how is it possible that there's low sodium? Nothing has left her body, so there shouldn't be less sodium present, right? Yes, but the water in your body is made of 0.9% sodium, so for every 1 liter of water, there are 9 grams of sodium. Most of the water in your body is inside your cells, and in general exists with 0.9% sodium. In the medical world, we call this normal saline, or isotonic. KC drank distilled water, which has no salt. If water flows to where there's salt, and your body water, which is mostly inside your cells, has salt, then KC cells must have lots of water flowing into them. This would mean that her organs, like her liver and her stomach, are starting to swell with water. That should be okay, though, because your abdomen is soft. But the water wouldn't just be flowing to those too. It would be flowing into her heart, her muscles, but those aren't enclosed in a hard space either, so it wouldn't be too much of a problem if they swelled up inside. But what is a problem is the brain. It's enclosed inside a hard space, your cranium, also known as your skull. Your brain only has space to expand 8% in volume until it starts to push up against the bones in your skull. As the water keeps flowing into the sodium-rich cells of Casey's body, her brain is starting to crush up against the sides of her skull, smashing blood vessels as it expands, preventing blood flow and causing hypoxia, or the deprivation of oxygen. As the flow of blood is disrupted to Casey's brain, parts of it start to necrose, or quite literally die. This damage upon brain expansion is known as herniation and means permanent brain damage in Casey's case. The disruption of hydrodynamic flow is a recurring physiologic theme when it comes to causes of sudden death. A cocaine overdose can overstimulate the heart, causing something called atrial fibrillation. This is a time when one part of your heart will beat at over 300 beats per minute, not actually contracting or ejecting blood. It causes blood to pool, forming a clot, which can lodge directly into your brain, causing a stroke, blocking oxygen flow to your brain and killing the tissue. In the case of a heart attack, the blood vessels providing your heart with oxygen are blocked by a plaque, meaning your heart muscle no longer gets any oxygen. The muscle begins to die quickly, and the rest of your body no longer receives any blood. In the case of alcoholism, when the liver is